Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're going to be focusing in on some of the most infamous assassinations and assassination attempts that the world has ever known. And we're starting with eliminations handed out by the Mafia.
The man who ran the Mafia's death squad is now a dead man walking. With the green light, Genovese puts the wheels of murder into motion.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're examining well-known assassinations attributed to the Mafia and other organized crime gangs.
I was very surprised he wasn't killed much sooner.
Joe Masseria. The story of Joe Masseria is full of twists and turns. Masseria led the New York crime family of the same name, with his reign lasting from 1922 to 1931. Seeking absolute control of New York, Masseria battled fellow gangster Salvatore Maranzano in what is known as the Castellamarese War.
Un capo, piccio, one boss.
But in 1931, Masseria's own lieutenant, Lucky Luciano, betrayed his boss and brokered a deal with Maranzano, positioning himself as second in command. Luciano orchestrated Masseria's hit, and he was shot to death inside a Coney Island restaurant called Nuova Villa Tamaro.
5 espresso.
And do what you need to.
Maranzano was made boss of all bosses following Masseria's death, but he too was killed by Luciano, who went on to establish the commission. Giuseppe Di Matteo. Santino Di Matteo was a member of the Sicilian Mafia, and this won't be the last time that he appears on this list. Di Matteo eventually turned informant and ratted out his colleagues, drawing the ire of other powerful mafioso. They didn't get to Santino, as he was under intense police protection, but they managed to grab his young son, Giuseppe. Gangsters dressed as police officers kidnapped Giuseppe and kept him prisoner for over 2 years, subjecting him to brutal conditions. Santino even came out of hiding and traveled to Sicily in the hopes of rescuing his son, but it was too late. On January 11, 1996, the 779th day of his imprisonment, Giuseppe was killed. Thomas DeSimone. You may know Thomas DeSimone better as the fictionalized Tommy DeVito, the hot-headed and psychotic gangster played by Joe Pesci in Goodfellas.
You're funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you. I make you laugh.
DeVito is modeled after DeSimone, who worked in New York's Lucchese crime family and partook in a number of murders, including those of William Benvena and Ronald Girotti.
Tommy DeSimone was a loose cannon. He was a brute, 6'4", 240 pounds, and he could really handle himself.
DeSimone went missing in January of 1979, and most historians believe that he was assassinated. Famous informant Henry Hill claims that DeSimone was killed on the orders of John Gotti and the Gambino crime family in retaliation for the murders of Benvena and Girotti.
But the promotion is a ploy. Instead of making his bones, Tommy is whacked.
Giovanni Falcone. Remember how we said we'd return to Santino Di Matteo? Well, here we are. His story traces back to Giovanni Falcone, a tough and brave Italian prosecutor who came down hard on the Mafia. He oversaw the famous Maxi trial throughout the late 80s and early 90s, which culminated in 338 convictions and 19 life sentences given to various bosses.
That made Judge Falcone a target, and he paid with his life.
But on May 23, 1992, the Mafia retaliated. They planted nearly 900 pounds of explosives under a bridge and blew them when Falcone drove over it, killing him and a number of others.
It's this part of the motorway that exploded as Judge Falcone's car went past.
Di Matteo took part in this hit and later turned informant, revealing all the details of the assassination.
Giovanni Falcone took his final breath while he was in my arms.
The Blackfriars Massacre. In the early morning of June 28, 1978, a number of men burst into Boston's Blackfriars pub and attacked the occupants, who had been playing a game of backgammon. 5 people were killed in the attack, including owner Vincent Salmonte and night manager John Kelly. Their bodies were later discovered by the pub's janitor. The perpetrators have never been identified, but investigators believe it was a gangland shooting orchestrated by the Irish mob. They had found trace amounts of illicit substances at the scene, and both Salmonte and Kelly were alleged to have personal connections to the mob. Some believe that the shooting was orchestrated by Whitey Bulger, the famous gangster popularized in the 2015 film Black Mass.
Just don't do it again.
Albert Anastasia. A co-founder of the American Mafia, Albert Anastasia ran the organized group Murder Incorporated and what is now the Gambino crime family. He quickly developed a reputation for being ruthless, earning scary nicknames like Lord High Executioner and the One-Man Army.
Albert Anastasia was the perfect model. Within the Mafia, Anastasia was recognized as a ruthless unflinching killer.
However, his reputation for violence gave Anastasia a number of equally dangerous enemies, and it all came to a head on October 25, 1957. While getting his hair cut at the Park Sheraton Hotel, 2 gunmen burst into the shop and shot Anastasia to death.
Suddenly, 2 armed men burst in and opened fire.
The orders allegedly came from rival crime boss Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino, who betrayed Anastasia, with the latter becoming head of the family.
Albert Anastasia is laid to rest. As a testament to his brutal character, only a handful of mourners attend his funeral.
Carmine Galante. Known as the Cigar, Carmine Galante was famous for his smoking habit and served as acting boss of the Bonanno crime family in the late 70s.
It's very well known that that's what I do.
During his tenure, the Bonanno family entered a war with the Gambino family as each vied for control of New York's illicit substances market. However, Galante proved too ambitious for his own good, and other crime bosses grew concerned about his brazen violence and unchecked aggression. A contract was placed on Galante by the commission, and on July 12, 1979, 3 masked men entered a Brooklyn restaurant and shot Galante. He was killed instantly, with the cigar he was smoking still dangling from his mouth.
My mother was destroyed. She was just destroyed.
Paul Castellano. Between 1976 and 1985, Paul Castellano ran the Gambino crime family, having succeeded Carlo Gambino himself after he died of a heart attack. In 1985, underboss Anello Della Croce died of cancer, and Castellano failed to attend his wake, infuriating other mafioso.
Castellano's refusal infuriated the rank and file, especially John Gotti.
To make matters worse, Castellano then promoted an undeserving mobster named Thomas Bellotti to underboss, further irritating an already furious group of gangsters. John Gotti and a number of conspirators placed a hit on Castellano, and both he and Bellotti were shot to death outside Sparks Steakhouse.
As Paul opened his door, 4 men in trench coats descended upon the vehicle.
These 2 deaths allowed Gotti to take the mantle and become head of the Gambino family.
Following the assassination, Gotti took over as boss of the Gambinos, but legal issues plagued his reign.
Bugsy Siegel. One of the most notorious gangsters in American history, Bugsy Siegel was paramount in the development of Las Vegas and its culture of gambling.
Bugsy used his charm and millions of dollars from the mafia on the gamble of a lifetime.
A prolific bootlegger in New York, Siegel moved out west when Prohibition was abolished in 1933, and he became a genuine celebrity as his cultural reputation increased. However, his Flamingo Hotel had a disastrous opening, and he quickly fell into debt with the mob.
Bugsy Siegel was in trouble. The Flamingo Hotel project soared millions over budget.
Some even suspected that Siegel was stealing construction money for his own personal profit. A contract was placed on his life, and on June 20th, 1947, Siegel was shot by a sniper while reading in his girlfriend's home.
A man crept up through the shrubbery against the window.
Somebody put a carbine on the trestle outside the living room.
9 shots ripped through the silence.
The shooter has never been identified. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Speaking of Prohibition, we've come to the most famous gangland shooting of all time. On Valentine's Day 1929, 7 men associated with Chicago's North Side mob were lined up and shot with Tommy guns by 4 unknown assailants.
Moran's gang aren't too worried. They can usually buy the cops' silence with a bribe or 2. But not these cops. They aren't law enforcers.
At the time, the North Side mob were in a war with Al Capone's Chicago outfit, as both vied for control of the city and its bootlegging operations. The shooting became international news and is now synonymous with mob violence.
He was much more likely to hire dangerous gunmen to assassinate somebody than to do it himself.
While the murders are officially unsolved, most people assume that the men were killed on Capone's orders, as he wished to eliminate North Side leader Bugs Moran and his lieutenants. However, Moran was not in attendance at the shooting and lived until 1957.
He never made it to the scene of the shooting. When he saw the cop car outside, he kept driving.
Do you know of any other infamous gangland stories?
Getting hold of the Flamingo seems to have gone fatally to Ben Siegel's head.
For our next video, we're going to be taking a look at world leaders who were shockingly assassinated while they were still in power.
Gandhi wanted an independent, peaceful India that protected religious freedom. But that was challenged by growing Muslim and Hindu nationalism.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're counting down world leaders in history who were assassinated while in office or holding power. So this excludes some significant figures like Franz Ferdinand.
Abraham Lincoln was assassinated 5 days after Lee surrenders to Grant.
So there is a great deal of uncertainty at that time.
Number 10. Park Chung-hee. On October 26, 1979, South Korea faced a pivotal moment in history with the assassination of President Park Chung-hee by his own intelligence chief, Kim Jae-gyu.
According to the memoir by former President Chun Doo-hwan, Kim disclosed his three-stage assassination project planned to kill Park and take over his power.
Park's rule, which began in 1961 following a military coup, was marked by significant economic development that propelled South Korea into the modern era. However, his tenure was also characterized by authoritarian practices, including the suppression of democratic opposition. The assassination, occurring amidst a private dinner, was a shocking end to nearly 2 decades of iron-fisted leadership and led to political upheaval. It precipitated a brief period of uncertainty, eventually paving the way for the country's transition towards democracy. Park's legacy remains complex, embodying both South Korea's economic ascent and its struggles for political freedom.
Koreans are still left to carry on its way to democracy with lessons from the past.
Number 9. William McKinley. The dawn of the 20th century witnessed a tragedy that would forever alter the course of the American presidency. On September 6, 1901, President William McKinley fell victim to a bullet while attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. An advocate for protective tariffs and a proponent of American imperialism, McKinley's tenure was pivotal in expanding America's global influence, notably through the Spanish-American War. The assailant, Leon Czolgosz, an anarchist, approached him under the guise of a handshake, firing 2 shots that would not immediately claim McKinley's life, but led to his death 8 days later due to gangrene from the wounds.
McKinley's death also confirmed the real fear that U.S. presidents would be targeted for political assassinations, spurring the expansion of the Secret Service to officially include protecting our nation's leaders.
His death thrust Theodore Roosevelt into the presidency, signaling a dramatic shift in American politics and policy.
He was the youngest president in American history, just 42 years old.
Number 8. Anwar Sadat.
Anwar Sadat, peacemaker of Egypt, killed in a military assassination.
In a moment that shocked the world, Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, was killed on October 6, 1981 during the annual Victory Parade in Cairo.
According to the official Middle East news agency, President Sadat was dead on arrival at Mahdi Military Hospital here in Cairo.
Sadat's bold efforts to achieve peace in the Middle East, especially through the 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty, had earned him both the Nobel Peace Prize and many enemies. His policies, which included economic reforms and a historic visit to Israel, were a significant departure from his predecessors, aiming to realign Egypt with the West. The assassination, carried out by members of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad opposed to his initiatives with Israel, resulted in a tragic end to a leader whose actions had dramatically altered the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East.
I believe no one will take 1 hour of my life if God doesn't agree to this.
Today, for Anwar Sadat, that hour came.
Number 7. Yitzhak Rabin.
Truly shocking news from the Middle East tonight. Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin has been assassinated.
Evening spent dreaming of peace turns into a national nightmare.
And here's another political tragedy in the Middle East. On November 4th, 1995, Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel, was killed by Yigal Amir, a right-wing extremist opposed to the Oslo Accords. Rabin, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, was instrumental in forging the historic peace agreement with the Palestine Liberation Organization, aimed at ending decades of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. The shooting occurred after a rally in Tel Aviv where Rabin had expressed his hope for peace in the region.
That's him coming down the ramp. The man in the blue t-shirt approached.
The killing of Rabin not only deprived Israel and the Middle East of a key architect of coexistence, but also deepened the divide within Israeli society.
There is here in English a memorial as well. It says, "Peace shall be his legacy."
Number 6. Olof Palme. The assassination of Olof Palme on February 28, 1986, plunged Sweden into a state of profound shock and mourning.
A man both loved and hated at home and abroad, Palme was shot and killed on Stockholm's busiest street.
Walking home from a cinema in Stockholm with his wife, without any bodyguard protection, an emblem of his and Sweden's open society, Palme, the Prime Minister, was shot in the back by an unknown assailant.
The hunt to find his killer has been as notorious in Sweden as his assassination.
His tenure had been notable with strong stances on social justice, anti-apartheid, and disarmament, making him a prominent figure on the world stage and, to some, a controversial one.
His anti-colonial and anti-racist views made him a fierce critic of global superpowers. While at home, he raised taxes to fund the welfare state and welcomed immigrants.
The murder, which remains unsolved, has left a lingering shadow over Swedish politics and society, symbolizing not only the vulnerability of public figures, but also the end of an era of innocence for Sweden. Number 5. Laurent Désiré Kabila.
Laurent Kabila was killed on the 16th of January 2001 in circumstances that remain clouded. He is now portrayed as a martyr.
Laurent Désiré Kabila's tenure as president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo abruptly ended on January 16, 2001, when he was murdered by one of his bodyguards. Kabila, who had come to power in 1997 by overthrowing the long-standing dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, was a central figure in the complex web of conflicts that plagued the DRC during the late 20th century.
He came into power with an army of child soldiers trained by neighboring Rwanda.
His leadership included efforts to end foreign exploitation of the country's vast mineral resources, though his rule was also criticized for authoritarian tendencies and human rights abuses. The circumstances of his death reflect the turbulent political environment of the DRC, with speculation about the involvement of various domestic and foreign interests in his death. Number 4. Julius Caesar. The Ides of March 44 BC remains one of history's most infamous dates, marking the assassination of Julius Caesar, a pivotal figure whose leadership transformed the Roman Republic.
Caesar was invited into the Senate room just a few meters from here. As he went to sit down, the plotters struck.
Caesar's dictatorial style, marked by significant reforms and territorial expansion, earned him both admiration and deep-seated resentment within the Senate. Viewing his consolidation of power as a threat to the Republic's democratic traditions, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius conspired against him. Caesar was ambushed and stabbed to death at a Senate meeting, a betrayal by those he considered allies.
All 23 plotters were hacking and stabbing in such a frenzy that some of them even stabbed each other.
The act sparked a series of civil wars, leading to the demise of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire under Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir.
The Republic was never restored, and in his honor, his successors were known as Caesar.
Number 3. John F. Kennedy.
A flash from Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds.
On November 22, 1963, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, sent shockwaves around the world. Kennedy was infamously struck down by Lee Harvey Oswald's bullets while riding in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. His presidency, though brief, included significant moments in the Cold War era, including the Cuban Missile Crisis, the space race, and early initiatives for civil rights reforms. Kennedy's death not only ended a presidency filled with hope and potential, but also heralded the beginning of a tumultuous period in American history, characterized by more political killings, social upheaval, and skepticism towards government institutions. The event, shrouded in conspiracy theories, has been meticulously analyzed, but remains a defining moment of the 20th century.
The assassination shook the nation and the Secret Service.
Number 2. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The murder of Gandhi on January 30th, 1948, stands as a profound tragedy in the annals of history. Known as the Mahatma, or Great Soul, Gandhi was the architect of India's independence movement against British rule, employing non-violent civil disobedience that inspired movements for civil rights and freedom across the world.
Gandhi wanted an independent, peaceful India that protected religious freedom. But that was challenged by growing Muslim and Hindu nationalism.
His assassin, Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist, opposed Gandhi's efforts to achieve peace between Hindus and Muslims during the partition of India. The murder, occurring during a prayer meeting in the garden of Birla House, New Delhi, plunged India into despair and highlighted the deep-seated religious and cultural divisions within the country.
He was assassinated by a Hindu nationalist who believed Gandhi had been too accommodating to Muslims during the partition.
Gandhi's legacy of non-violence and his philosophy of peaceful resistance continue to influence global movements.
Around 1 million people turned out for his funeral.
Number 1. Abraham Lincoln.
About 10 minutes after 10, Booth began to mount the stairs leading up to the second tier of boxes, where you would find President Lincoln.
The evening of April 14, 1865, witnessed the shocking assassination of Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Lincoln, a figure of monumental significance in American history, led the nation through its Civil War, preserving the Union and emancipating the slaves. His killer, John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, aimed to revive the Confederate cause by eliminating the man he viewed as the principal obstacle to the South's independence.
It was essentially to accomplish what the Confederacy had failed to accomplish on the battlefield, and that was to win the war.
Lincoln's death came just days after the Confederate surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, turning a moment of national relief and joy into one of profound grief. The aftermath of Lincoln's death deeply affected the course of Reconstruction and the evolution of the United States, leaving an incredible mark on the nation's collective memory.
Abraham Lincoln was assassinated 5 days after Lee surrenders to Grant. So there is a great deal of uncertainty at that time.
Are there other important leaders who should be included here?
John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas.
Apparently, showbiz can be a dangerous place to work, because as we're about to see, there have been many shocking hits in the entertainment industry.
You're about to see a dramatization of actual facts, in which some of the names have been changed. But the story is true.
Welcome to WatchMojo. For this list, we're talking about popular people in entertainment targeted because of their socio-political and artistic viewpoints and/or by known hate groups or crime organizations. However, personal murders like Selena or Christina Grimmie, while impactful, have been excluded.
Well, was it a robbery? Was it a break-in? It was so sketchy on everything.
Christian Poveda. Renowned French photojournalist Christian Poveda found an issue that needed more than just photographic representation. His debut documentary, La Vida Loca, explored horrific gang wars in El Salvador, mostly from the perspective of the 18th Street Gang.
No vamos a dejar de ser pandilla, no vamos a dejar de ser lo que somos, va, pero puta es un trabajo y el trabajo se respeta, compadre.
Despite the film's renown, it gave some dangerous people more exposure than they wanted. In 2009, Poveda was shot dead in a hit by the 18th Street Gang facilitated by a corrupt police officer. Nearly a dozen conspirators were convicted, but one Salvadoran journalist asserted that Poveda's was just one of many murders in the area that day. Poveda believed in taking the ultimate risks to spread the most urgent stories. La Vida Loca remains a worthy success, but it cost a good man and important filmmaker his life. Chalino Sanchez. El Rey del Corrido was in the right place at the right time to influence modern Mexican folk. Sadly, Chalino Sanchez was not so lucky in 1992. 4 months after surviving a gunfight at Coachella, he dismissed a death threat at a concert in Culiacan. During the drive home, he was pulled over by men claiming to be state police, who needed a word with him at the station. Sanchez was found bound and dead of a gunshot the following day. The narco corrido trailblazer had his share of enemies as a volatile man who brought a criminal underworld to mainstream attention. Culiacan was and still is a cartel stronghold. Sanchez's killers were never identified, but his music and influence continue to expose urgent issues. Porque mi corazón morirá por ti. Joan Root. Kenyan conservationist Joan Root was a groundbreaking voice in environmental documentaries, a prominent activist who took on corrupt industries and poachers.
As a result, the nutrients that would otherwise be locked up in the dead wood are rapidly recycled into the system, making it a richer and more varied place.
This likely contributed to 4 men killing her in her home with AK-47s. But no one knows who exactly was behind the killing. It could have been any number of criminal figures and syndicates, with some evidence pointing to disgruntled or corrupt associates hiring the killers.
She didn't know Naivasha. She didn't know the area. She didn't know the people.
4 men were eventually arrested, with robbery as a suspected motive, only to be acquitted due to flimsy evidence. For all of Ruth's work behind and away from the camera to bring justice, she has yet to receive any herself.
Really, in her life story was a microcosm of what is happening to the, not just to Kenya and Africa, but to the rest of the world.
Juliano Mer Jamis.
Yeah, the animal of racism is covered there with nice democratic discourse.
Actor and filmmaker Juliano Mer Jamis was beloved in Palestine and Israel, a citizen and outspoken peace activist of both states. His proudest achievement was establishing the Freedom Theater in the Jenin refugee camp. He was driving home from this cultural center when a masked gunman shot him 5 times in front of his son and babysitter. Though no one was ever convicted, it's suspected that the killer was a refugee and Islamic fundamentalist. Mer Jamis was always aware of the risks involved in trying to unify cultures with progressive ideals. Just as he brought together Palestinians and Israelis in life, he united them in mourning his senseless death. Andrés Escobar. Sports fanaticism can become dangerous. In a case like Andrés Escobar's, it can become fatal. The Colombian footballer was a hugely popular defender and public figure. Alas, his reputation plummeted after a 1994 World Cup match between Colombia and the United States, in which Escobar accidentally deflected the ball into his own team's goal. This helped seal Colombia's defeat and Escobar's fate. 5 days later, he was shot once for each of the 6 goals called during that unfortunate game. Humberto Castro Muñoz, a cartel enforcer whose boss allegedly bet big on Colombia, was later convicted on a guilty plea. Theo Van Gogh. A descendant of Vincent van Gogh's brother, Theo Van Gogh was a prolific and enlightening filmmaker. But controversy erupted around the first installment in his documentary series Submission, which dealt with violence against women in Muslim societies.
Oh Allah, Most High, life with my husband is hard to bear, but I submit my will to you.
The short film was written by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a Somali-born former Muslim who's been accused of Islamophobia. The backlash culminated in Islamic extremist Mohammed Bouyeri shooting and cutting Van Gogh to death. He then pinned a death threat against Hirsi Ali to the body. The very public assassination and murder trial gripped Dutch media. Van Gogh is now considered a defining figure of the importance of modern documentary filmmaking and a reminder of its dangers. Dino Bravo. Adolfo Bresciano was an icon of Canadian pro wrestling under the name Dino Bravo, but he was also swept up in violent enterprises outside of the ring. After retiring in 1992, he became a rising star in Canada's untaxed cigarette trade. It's assumed that he worked for his late uncle-in-law Vincenzo Catroni's notorious Montreal Mafia. Whatever he was up to, Bresciano's wife and daughter found him dead in his home with 17 gunshot wounds.
Moi, je pense qu'il a peut-être été naïf. Et souvent, l'argent fait faire des choses.
Fellow wrestler Rick Martel speculates that his friend was targeted after police caught onto a cocaine operation he became involved in. Little is known about Bresciano's double life, let alone his unsolved murder. It's still all but certain that Canada's strongest man was finally brought down by organized crime.
Many times in that match we take care of the boss man, but he seems to be aggressive and he definitely has an attitude problem.
Pierpaolo Pasolini.
In maniera sempre informe, diciamo così, non confessionale, ma in certo modo religiosa del mondo. Ecco perché investo questo mio modo di vedere le cose anche nelle mie opere.
Pierpaolo Pasolini's shocking films and writing made him one of Europe's most prominent, if divisive, Marxist artists. His personal life was also steeped in controversy for his involvement with teenage boys. After Pasolini was run over and beaten to death, teenager Giuseppe Pelosi confessed to killing him in self-defense. The slaying quickly became one of the most notorious in film history, especially for evidence suggesting Pelosi's innocence. After being released from prison, he claimed that his confession was coerced by several men who likely assassinated Pasolini. It's now popularly believed that the left-wing figure fell victim to the right-wing terrorism that pervaded Italy by the 1970s. In 2023, a formal plea to investigate evidence implicating a politically affiliated crime syndicate was submitted.
Listen, you insignificant, wretched nothings. You are here solely for our pleasure. Expect none of the kindness you knew in the outside world. like liberty or the ridiculous idea of showing pity to others.
Sharon Tate.
Oh my God, Sharon.
The senseless murder of actress Sharon Tate, along with several others at the home she shared with director Roman Polanski, is a cultural touchstone of the 1960s. An 8.5 months pregnant Tate and 4 friends had been stabbed to death. Police soon arrested members of Charles Manson's Bohemian cult. While there is debate about their motivations, the leading theory is that Manson intended to frame black people for high-profile murders, thus inciting an apocalyptic race war he dubbed Helter Skelter. The bizarre incident has since gained an almost mythical reputation in the true crime and Hollywood zeitgeists. The fact remains that 6 lives were tragically and brutally lost.
2 years ago, the hippie commune led by Charles Manson moved into this old Wild West film set just outside Los Angeles. And it was here that they were living on the night the alleged murders took place.
John Lennon.
We all been playing those mind games forever.
One of the most influential musicians of all time, John Lennon was also one of the most outspoken pacifists of his time. Mark David Chapman was a devoted fan, but resented what he saw as the hypocrisy in the wealthy pop star's humanitarianism. The Christian convert was also offended by Lennon's famously misinterpreted "more popular than Jesus" comment.
If you give me the opportunity, I will do it.
After months of planning, Chapman flew to New York City, followed Lennon into his apartment complex, and shot him 4 times in the back. This tragedy has become recognized as a defining symbol of violence in the modern age. Chapman himself now deeply regrets his actions. He also admits to his true motivation for such high-profile violence: to achieve his own fame. What entertainer assassinations did you find the most shocking?
I didn't want to hurt you. I'm just a jealous guy.
Okay, our next video features assassinations that shocked the world, in part because they were done in broad daylight.
I think all of the most credible evidence suggests that Lee Harvey Oswald fired the bullets that killed President Kennedy.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're examining 10 infamous assassinations done in broad daylight.
We're often reluctant to recognize that great tragedy can arise from small and twisted minds.
Archduke Franz Ferdinand. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist. Riding in an open car, the Archduke and his wife Sophie were shot by Princip as they traveled through the city.
It makes headlines across the world. The assassin belongs to a group backed by neighboring Serbia.
The killing was a catalyst for World War I, as it heightened existing tensions in Europe.
Austria-Hungary felt it had no choice but to assert its dominance.
Austria-Hungary sets out to punish Serbia. It wants to quash support for Serbian nationalism.
The event revealed the profound consequences a single act could have on global politics, triggering a chain reaction of alliances, declarations of war, and ultimately reshaping the course of history with devastating consequences.
Just 6 weeks after a man was killed by a single bullet, the alliances were triggered. Germany invaded France, and the First World War had begun.
Julius Caesar. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, Julius Caesar, the renowned Roman general and statesman, faced a gruesome assassination in the theater of Pompeii.
Caesar was invited into the Senate room just a few meters from here. As he went to sit down, the plotters struck.
A group of Roman senators, including notable figures like Brutus and Cassius, orchestrated the conspiracy to prevent what they perceived as Caesar's tyrannical rule. As Caesar entered the Senate, he was attacked and stabbed multiple times.
Someone else stabbed him in the side. This was to prove the killer blow. But by then, all 23 plotters were hacking and stabbing in such a frenzy that some of them even stabbed each other.
His death was a pivotal moment in Roman history, triggering a series of civil wars and ultimately leading to the end of the Roman Republic.
Once the deed was done, the conspirators turned out to have no forward plan. What they got was civil war, which ended up producing one-man rule, emperors.
The conspirators' actions forever etched the phrase, "Beware the Ides of March," into literary lore. Olof Palme. On February 28, 1986, Olof Palme, the Prime Minister of Sweden, was assassinated in Stockholm. Palme and his wife were walking home from a cinema when an assailant shot him on a busy street.
A man both loved and hated at home and abroad, Palme was shot and killed on Stockholm's busiest street as he walked with his wife Lisbeth. Palme had been to the cinema with his family without a bodyguard.
The slaying shocked Sweden and the broader international community, as Palme was a prominent and controversial political figure.
He was an outspoken critic of apartheid and the Vietnam War, and his domestic policies divided Swedes.
The motive behind the killing remains unclear, and despite extensive investigations, the case has not been definitively solved.
This is one of the biggest police investigations in the world. It's often compared with the assassination of JFK.
Palme's death changed Swedish politics, leading to increased security measures. Aldo Moro. On March 16, 1978, Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro was abducted and assassinated by the Red Brigades, a far-left militant group.
The extreme left terrorist group, the Red Brigades, murdered former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, who they'd kidnapped and held for nearly 2 months.
Moro was kidnapped in Rome, and his body was later discovered in the trunk of a car. The Red Brigades demanded the release of imprisoned comrades in exchange for Moro's life, but the Italian government refused to negotiate.
Italy's interior minister at the time was Francesco Cossiga, who took a hard line and refused to negotiate with the Red Brigades for Moro's release.
The killing upended Italy's politics in a European era rife with acts of violence, committed by a broad panoply of extremist groups. Harvey Milk. On November 27, 1978, Harvey Milk, the pioneering openly gay San Francisco city supervisor, was assassinated at City Hall.
Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed.
His life and activism aimed to champion LGBTQ+ rights. Dan White, a fellow city supervisor disgruntled over political disputes, shot and killed Milk along with Mayor George Moscone. The murders sent shockwaves through the LGBTQ+ community, highlighting the challenges of those advocating for equality.
People began to gather at the steps of City Hall, looking for answers.
White's subsequent trial, where he received a lenient sentence for voluntary manslaughter, fueled outrage and led to the coining of the term Twinkie defense, reflecting the era's discriminatory attitudes towards the LGBTQ+ community within the legal system.
After the verdict, total chaos. No one expected Dan White to get off with voluntary manslaughter twice. What happened here was the jury understood Dan White.
Anna Politkovskaya. On October 7, 2006, Russian journalist and human rights activist Anna Politkovskaya was murdered in Moscow.
The murder of Politkovskaya in a contract-style killing provoked international condemnation of the Kremlin for its failure to defend freedom of speech.
Shot in the lobby of her apartment building, Politkovskaya's fearless reporting on the Chechen conflict and government abuses had made her a target. Her murder exemplified the dangers faced by journalists critical of the Kremlin.
Her investigative journalism won her international recognition, but also angered the Russian government. Work that sharply criticized the Kremlin and human rights abuses in Chechnya.
Politkovskaya's investigative work, often exposing human rights violations, corruption, and brutality, had earned her both international acclaim and powerful enemies. The perpetrators behind her assassination remain elusive, underscoring the risks of journalistic freedom and the risks associated with uncovering inconvenient truths in the complex political landscape of Russia.
Generally speaking, since her murder, there have been more than 700 attacks against journalists. 57 were killed. It's an utter tragedy that in Russia specifically, those who tell people the truth become the victims.
Yitzhak Rabin. On November 4, 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in Tel Aviv during a peace rally.
The Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the architect of the Middle East peace process, has been assassinated.
Yigal Amir, an extremist opposed to the Oslo Accords, fired shots at Rabin, creating a tragic turn in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. The daylight killing shocked the nation and strained prospects for reconciliation. Rabin's death became a pivotal point in Middle Eastern history, altering the political landscape of peace negotiations.
Evening spent dreaming of peace turns into a national nightmare.
The event reflected the deep divisions within Israeli society and the challenges faced by leaders pursuing peace, in a region marred by long-standing conflicts and ideological tensions.
The fallout of that traumatic loss inflaming hardliners on both sides of the conflict.
Rabin's assassination was a tremendous blow to the peace process.
Israel soon drifting rightward in the vacuum of a strong leader pushing for peace.
Ahmed Shah Massoud. On September 9, 2001, Ahmed Shah Massoud, the Afghan resistance leader and key opponent of the Taliban, was assassinated in a bombing in northern Afghanistan, just days before the 9/11 attacks. Two assailants posing as journalists detonated explosives during an interview.
Commander Massoud agreed to give what would be his last interview. Two men posing as Belgian journalists were actually assassins, according to some, sent by Al-Qaeda.
Massoud's death served as a prelude to the broader conflict that unfolded, with the Taliban harboring Al-Qaeda operatives responsible for the subsequent terrorist attacks.
By 2001, Massoud had become a prime target for the Taliban and for Al-Qaeda, which was already planning the attacks on the United States.
His murder highlighted the complex geopolitical dynamics in the region and the escalating threat of radical extremism, ultimately contributing to the unfolding events that reshaped the world in the aftermath of 9/11.
Massoud's life was cut short, yet his soldiers fought on. Backed by American special forces, they routed the Taliban in the months following September 11th.
Martin Luther King Jr. On the fateful evening of April 4th, 1968, civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee.
He was an American martyr. A man who broke through the barriers of segregation with the philosophy of nonviolence.
Standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, King, a fervent advocate for racial equality, was struck down by a sniper's bullet. His death sent shockwaves throughout the nation, triggering an outpouring of grief and anger.
Rioting erupted in more than 100 cities across the nation that night and through the weekend.
James Earl Ray, a fugitive with a past steeped in racism, was later apprehended and pleaded guilty to the crime. King's murder was a tragic and critical moment in the civil rights movement. His eloquent speeches, nonviolent activism, and tireless dedication to dismantling systemic racism had made him a symbol of hope for millions.
Some of the values that presently exist are certainly out of line with the values and the idealistic structure that brought our nation into being. Unfortunately, we haven't been true to these ideals.
President John F. Kennedy. On November 22, 1963, the United States witnessed a watershed moment as President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Riding in a motorcade, Kennedy was fatally shot while passing through Dealey Plaza.
On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy and the First Lady arriving in Dallas on that day that would change America. That tragic trip through Dealey Plaza. The first couple riding through that windy road in Dallas in a Lincoln Continental.
Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested but denied involvement. The assassination fueled numerous conspiracy theories.
Whether or not other people knew, whether or not other people helped him, those are mysteries that will probably linger forever.
Kennedy's death had profound consequences. It was the end of an era known as Camelot. The event prompted increased security measures for future presidents and shaped public perception, symbolizing the fragility of leadership and the enduring intrigue surrounding the circumstances of JFK's tragic demise. The Warren Commission investigated, concluding that Oswald acted alone.
They find that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in killing President John F. Kennedy.
But that answer doesn't satisfy the public for long.
Which assassination do you think changed history the most?
The Panjshiris are a proud and fierce people, just like their commander, the man who pushed out the Soviets in the 80s and the Taliban in the 90s. Okay, prepare yourselves for some fascinating tales of individuals who survived the deadliest attempts on their lives. In fact, they survived the most assassination attempts.
How do you account for the fact that you survive each time?
I'm an Irish Catholic with the grace of God on my shoulder.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the highest number of times high-profile figures managed to escape being bumped off in history. Number 20, Alexander II of Russia. After Alexander II took control of Russia in 1855, he quickly initiated sweeping reforms across the country. This included abolishing serfdom, building a mass railway network, and restructuring the military. Alexander even famously sold Alaska to the U.S. in 1867. However, not everyone was happy about these changes. Revolutionaries and Polish nationalists attempted to cut Alexander's life short on 5 occasions between 1866 and 1880. Notably, at the World's Fair in 1867, Antony Berezovsky attempted to shoot the Tsar, only for his weapon to break and strike a horse. The 6th attempt on Alexander's life would ultimately prove fatal. In 1881, members of the revolutionary group Narodnaya Volya used explosives to assassinate him as he traveled in St. Petersburg. Number 19, Pervez Musharraf.
I don't believe in dishonesty. I believe in telling a person right straight, because then that is how trust is developed.
Pervez Musharraf was the president of Pakistan from 2001 to 2008. Musharraf was seen as a controversial figure, having seized power through a military coup and aligned with the U.S. during their conflict with neighboring Afghanistan. Unsurprisingly, he made several enemies who tried to assassinate him over 4 times. In December of 2003 alone, there were 2 attempts on Musharraf's life involving explosives.
He is trying to further reinforce his stance that his life is at threat.
While the president managed to escape unharmed on both occasions, the second attack resulted in the loss of 16 other lives. Then, in 2007, an unknown group shot at Musharraf's airplane as it departed the city of Rawalpindi. All of these attempts proved futile, and in 2023, Musharraf passed away from natural causes.
I should have done something with this Osama bin Laden card and gained advantage. So obviously it is illogical.
Number 18, Danny Green.
There's also stories going around that it might have been a dissident group. Either one of them, I believe, could either one of them would do anything so obvious. I think it's the work of a crank of some sort.
Known as the Irishman, Danny Green was a former U.S. Marine who grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and was an influential figure in the Longshore Workers' Labor Union. He later became a notorious crime boss, forming his own gang called the Celtic Club and taking part in the Cleveland Mafia War. It's believed that Green was involved in up to 80% of incendiary attacks in Cleveland over a 10-year period.
If any of these maggots from the so-called mafia want to come after me, I'm not a hard man to find.
As such, he became the target of at least 4 assassination attempts, including a devastating explosion that destroyed a whole floor in his home. However, his luck ran out in 1977 when an explosive placed in an adjacent car went off, fatally injuring him. Number 17, Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin was one of the key figures in the Russian Revolution, which changed the landscape of the country forever. As a result, he was seen as a hero by many and an adversary by others. Lenin's influence and high-profile status made him the target of around 5 assassination attempts. After speaking at a factory in Moscow, Lenin headed towards his car. Fanny Kaplan, a member of the Socialist Revolutionary Party, then fired at him, striking the leader twice and inflicting severe injuries.
I can't believe you shot Lenin! He was my best customer!
I shot him 3 times and didn't even kill him, the cockroach! What is he, Rasputin?
Kaplan was swiftly arrested and executed for her deed. Although Lenin survived the attack, it's believed that it contributed to his declining health and eventual passing in 1924.
Comrade Lenin. Yes, my shepherd. When my revolution is complete, the flock's left will be so powerful. You one problem will be finding my equal to balance from the right.
Number 16, Bill Clinton.
I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never.
While he's most notorious for his affair in office, President Bill Clinton is also one of America's most targeted politicians. There have been at least 6 attempts on his life, 4 of which occurred in 1994. That January, Ronald Barber threatened to take out Clinton as he jogged. Later in September, Frank Corder crashed a small plane onto the White House lawn, losing his life in the process. The following month, Francisco Duran mistakenly shot at a group of people at the White House, believing Clinton was among them. He landed himself a 40-year prison sentence. Finally, Clinton was a target for Ramzi Yousef, who orchestrated the 1993 World Trade Center attack. However, Yousef abandoned his plan due to the president's robust security.
So if something was discovered, a bomb, the change from the initial plan to plan B, C, or D should be relatively seamless. That's part of their planning process.
Number 15, Grigory Rasputin.
Time to dance on your graves.
According to popular legend, one of the most difficult people to take out was Russia's Grigory Rasputin. Known as the Mad Monk, his first brush with death seemingly took place in 1914. While leaving his home, Rasputin was stabbed in the abdomen by Hyonya Guseva. He managed to knock her out and she was institutionalized. Then in 1916, Rasputin was killed by 3 nobles: Felix Yusupov, Dmitry Pavlovich, and Vladimir Purishkevich. However, the story goes that he put up a fight before eventually going down. Rasputin reportedly withstood being poisoned with cyanide and shot multiple times before being wrapped in a cloth and thrown into the Malanevka River, where some believe he met his end. Number 14, Sukarno. In 1945, Sukarno made history as the first president of Indonesia after leading the country to independence from the Netherlands. His growing relationship with the USSR raised concerns for the CIA, which opposed communist nations. As such, they backed actions against him, including a coup attempt and assassination plots. It's believed there were at least 6 attempts made on Sukarno's life. In 1957, while visiting a school in central Jakarta, the militia group Darul Islam used grenades to try and take out Sukarno. He survived the attack, but sadly, 6 children died. Another infamous attempt came in 1960, when Air Force pilot Daniel Maukar used a plane to fire at Sukarno's residences. Yet, the president was not harmed. Number 13, Rajiv Gandhi. In 1984, Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her bodyguards in response to Operation Blue Star, a military operation to remove Sikh separatists from the Holy Golden Temple. This incident resulted in her son assuming leadership, which also made him a target. Between 1985 and 1991, there were 9 attempts on his life. In 1987, one such attack was filmed when sailor Vijita Rohana struck Gandhi with his rifle as he inspected the Guard of Honor at the house of the Sri Lankan president. Tragically, in 1991, time ran out for Gandhi. He was assassinated alongside 14 others by a member of the separatist group Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, who was wearing an explosive device. Number 12, Yasser Arafat.
We are fed up to be rats. Only for snipings and for killing.
As a prominent figure in Palestinian politics, Yasser Arafat was beloved by many but despised by others. By some estimates, Arafat survived at least 13 assassination attempts. There was reportedly a plan by Israeli forces to shoot down a passenger plane in 1982, believing he was on board. It was scrapped after they realized it was his look-alike brother on the plane, alongside some injured Palestinian youngsters. In 1996, another attempt was foiled after Palestine officials discovered a plot by Hamas to attack Arafat with weapons and explosives. Due to the constant threats, Arafat stated he never spent more than 1 night in the same room. Although official records attribute his 2004 death to a stroke, some still believe that Arafat was poisoned.
Suspicions of poisoning grow, and Palestinians point the finger at Israel, as Tawfik Tirawi, the president of the Palestinian Commission of Inquiry on Arafat's death, said on Tuesday.
Number 11, Muammar Gaddafi.
There are odd things happening in Libya. Nobody knows what's happening inside Libya. So you've got events there.
After leading a coup in 1969, Muammar Gaddafi took control of Libya and ruled the country for over 4 decades as a dictator. Throughout that time, he made many enemies, especially in the West. In 1986, the US, believing that Gaddafi was involved in a Berlin attack, launched a military campaign that targeted his compound with explosives. While he survived, many did not. Also, former UK security officer David Shaler claimed that in 1996, MI6 botched an attempt to assassinate Gaddafi by placing an explosive under the wrong car, resulting in several casualties. In 2011, a NATO airstrike took the life of one of Gaddafi's sons, but yet again, he evaded death. Gaddafi was eventually killed months later by rebel forces.
If you say they do love you, then why are they capturing Benghazi and they say they're against you there? Why are they in
Zawiya?
It is a guide.
It is guide, and not my people.
Number 10, Vladimir Putin.
This plot has been known about by authorities for, well, close to 2 months now, and it is only now being made public by a state-owned network.
Due to his divisive nature, especially in recent times, Vladimir Putin has become a prime assassination target. To date, it's believed Putin has survived 6 attempts on his life.
Стало еще сложнее и еще опаснее.
Even more difficult and even more dangerous.
I believe that.
The first known incident was in 2002 when an Iraqi man planning to attack the leader in Azerbaijan was arrested. Following his decision to invade Ukraine, 2 more attempts were made. In 2022, Ukrainian official Kirilo Budanov disclosed an unsuccessful attack on Putin that was made in the Caucasus region. Then in 2023, 2 drones were shot down near the Kremlin, which Russia claimed were sent by Ukraine to kill Putin. These incidents seem to have made Putin so paranoid that he is allegedly using a body double in public.
Was it an operation to try to create some kind of damage at the Kremlin? Who knows?
Number 9. Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru became India's first prime minister after the country gained its independence from Britain in 1947. Despite being widely loved, Nehru was a target for extremists, and this threat became heightened after his fellow activist, Mahatma Gandhi, was assassinated. Altogether, Nehru is believed to have survived 6 attempts on his life. In 1955, it was reported that a knife-wielding man jumped on the prime minister's car. Interestingly, he played down the incident in the press, calling the weapon, quote, very small. That same year, there was also an alleged plot by the CIA to take him out. The final attempt came in 1961 when a device exploded in Delhi shortly after Nehru passed by. While he was unhurt, 5 people sustained injuries.
My being told that you must not say anything when evil is happening, lest the evil may become worse.
Number 8. Barack Obama.
To those Americans whose support I have yet to earn, I may not have won your vote tonight, but I hear your voice.
With at least 7 known incidents, it appears no other U.S. president has had as many assassination attempts as Barack Obama. In November 2011, Oscar Ramiro Ortega Hernandez fired several shots at the White House, hoping to hit the president, who was fortunately not present.
This is a man who discharged a rifle in downtown D.C. I think that speaks volumes.
No injuries or fatalities resulted from the incident, and Ortega Hernandez received a 25-year prison sentence. Then in 2013, Glenn Scott Crawford, who had ties to the KKK, and Eric J. Fite hatched a bizarre plot involving a death ray to target several individuals, including Obama. Their plan to use this radiation device was foiled, and Crawford was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while Fite got 8 years and 1 month.
Crawford wanted help and money to execute the death ray.
The only thing it won't kill is trees.
Number 7. Queen Victoria. Throughout her long reign, Queen Victoria, one of the most influential British monarchs in history, was nearly killed on 8 occasions. The majority happened the same way. A man with a firearm attacked as Victoria was in her carriage. The first attempt occurred in 1840 as Victoria, 4 months pregnant with her first child, rode with her husband, Prince Albert. Edward Oxford stepped forward and fired 2 pistols, missing the target.
For pity's sake, smile, woman. Anyone would think we had quarreled.
Don't talk to me.
Oxford was subdued and committed to an asylum. In 1850, Robert Pate, a former army officer who was known for his odd behavior, struck the Queen on the head with his cane. He was quickly apprehended and confined to a penal colony in Tasmania, Australia.
An armed man has been found in the gardens. What? He said he wished to harm the Queen.
Number 6. Hussein of Jordan.
And you'd realize that security is really a state of mind.
In his early years, Hussein, the future monarch of Jordan, had a close relationship with his grandfather, King Abdullah I. In 1951, while Hussein accompanied Abdullah for prayers, Mustafa Shukri Asho, a Palestinian extremist, opened fire at the pair. King Abdullah was fatally hit, but Hussein miraculously survived after the bullet struck a medal given to him by his grandfather. Throughout his reign as king, which ended with his passing in 1999, Hussein is said to have survived around 12 attempts on his life. These plots ranged from the typical armed rebel schemes to more sinister ones like replacing his nose drops with acid. Another plan to poison Hussein was discovered after several deceased cats were found in the palace. Number 5. Josip Broz Tito. In 1948, then Prime Minister and later President of Yugoslavia, Josip Broz Tito, was fed up with the attempts on his life by his former World War II ally, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Tito issued a stern letter to Stalin, demanding he stop sending killers. Otherwise, quote, "I'll send one to Moscow, and I won't have to send a second." Reportedly, Stalin kept this letter in his office until his death in 1953. But it didn't stop him or others from trying to take out Tito, who allegedly survived 22 assassination attempts. There's even speculation that Stalin didn't perish from natural causes but due to poisoning, as Tito may have followed through on his chilling promise. Number 4. Charles de Gaulle. Not every failed assassination gets turned into a best-selling novel and an Oscar-nominated movie, but not everyone was like Charles de Gaulle. After fighting for France in World War II and leading resistance movements, de Gaulle later became Prime Minister and then President of France. However, by ending colonial rule in Algeria, he drew the ire of the extremist group Organisation Armée Secrète. On August 22, 1962, an ambush organized by Colonel Jean-Marie Bastien-Thierry peppered de Gaulle's motorcade with bullets. Although 2 guards reportedly perished, the president and his wife were miraculously okay. Bastien-Thierry was executed for his involvement, and other conspirators were sentenced to life in prison.
An hour ago, in the courtyard of the Fort d'Ivry outside Paris, Lieutenant Colonel Bastien-Thierry was executed by firing squad for leading the attempt on the life of General de Gaulle last August.
In addition to this, it's believed de Gaulle survived at least 30 assassination attempts. Number 3. Adolf Hitler.
If they are trusted, if they can get a weapon into proximity with Hitler inside the inner defense zone, then yes, they have a shot at taking Hitler out.
While the Allied forces had ambitions to snuff out the Führer of Germany, Adolf Hitler also had internal threats on his life. Historians have so far uncovered evidence of at least 42 plans to assassinate him. In many of these, luck played a big part in Hitler's survival. In 1943, German officer Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorff planned to detonate timed explosives as he hugged Hitler after showing him captured weaponry. However, with the timer set to 10 minutes, Hitler finished quickly, leaving von Gersdorff to quietly defuse the device in a bathroom. Similarly, the infamous 20 July plot by Klaus von Stauffenberg failed when the explosive briefcase he placed beside Hitler was moved before it detonated.
It will be a catastrophe.
Number 2. Zog I of Albania. With around 600 blood feuds, King Zog I of Albania had a lot of enemies looking to knock him off. After all, he reportedly survived over 55 assassination attempts. Zog began his career in the military and later rose to power as prime minister, then president, and finally king in 1928. One notable attempt occurred in 1924 when he was shot twice by Bechir Valteri as he entered parliament. The future monarch reportedly continued working as if nothing happened. Another daring incident happened in 1931. Zog and his entourage were shot at the opera in Vienna, Austria. While the king was fine, a guard was killed and a minister was wounded. It's said that Zog fearlessly fired back at the retreating assailants. Number 1. Fidel Castro.
We can go on for 5, 10, 15, 20 more years. The only obligation on our part, really, is toward peace.
Few people have danced with death as much as Cuba's Fidel Castro. There were allegedly 638 plans to take the revolutionary out, many of which were orchestrated by the CIA. Some of these plots were cartoonish. 2 involved tainting Castro's beloved cigars with an explosive agent or a toxin. Another featured booby-trapping a seashell that would be painted to entice the scuba diving enthusiast.
The CIA acquired 2 books on Caribbean mollusks, but they just can't find a shell big enough to do the job.
One plan even seemed straight out of a James Bond movie, involving a poison administered through a pen. At one point, the CIA lazily considered throwing leaflets throughout Cuba, offering a reward to take out Castro. Ultimately, the man who said he would have won gold if surviving assassinations were an Olympic event passed away in 2016 at age 90.
638 plots to kill Castro and a few close shaves. Now it looks like the beard can die a natural death.
Which fictional assassination attempt left the biggest impact on you?
Some of the most ruthless eliminations have been carried out by cartels. And here now are the most infamous ones.
The bodies were discovered early yesterday morning by a farm worker along a well-traveled road. They had not been there 12 hours earlier.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're examining notorious cartel assassinations that shocked nations. We'll explore what happened and see if those responsible faced any justice.
Actually, we are feeling very insecure. Each day you never know where something will happen that can affect you or your family.
Fernando Villavicencio.
Fernando Villavicencio was always outspoken about alleged links between politicians and organized crime.
Before entering politics, Villavicencio was an investigative journalist who criticized former President Rafael Correa. As such, he spent time in prison and in exile. After Ecuador's National Assembly was dissolved, Villavicencio ran for the presidency. In August 2023, after getting threats from gangs, he was leaving a campaign rally in the capital city Quito. Just as Villavicencio got to his car, he was ambushed and fatally shot.
A man who'd exposed corruption. A man who said he wasn't afraid.
The assassin, Johan David Castillo Lopez, also threw a grenade, which thankfully did not go off. 9 people were injured, and Lopez died from gunshot wounds. The criminal group Los Lobos claimed responsibility for the attack, but this is disputed. Several people were arrested in connection with the assassination. However, all of them were killed in prison.
2 daughters remembering their father. A very personal goodbye after what was a very public murder.
Rodrigo Lara. In 1983, Lara was appointed Colombia's Minister of Justice by President Belisario Betancourt. He soon began targeting criminal organizations, corrupt politicians, and Pablo Escobar and his group, the Medellin Cartel. Lara's interference contributed to Escobar's expulsion from Congress and investigation by authorities. In April 1984, Lara was traveling in a convoy when Biron Velázquez and Ivan Darío Guisaro, paid by the Medellin Cartel, drove up to his vehicle on motorbikes and opened fire, killing the minister.
Los hombres de siempre se equivocan si creen que pueden derrotar a Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria.
While Guisaro was slain by Lara's bodyguard, Velázquez was later arrested for the assassination and then paroled in 1995. Escobar fled to Panama days after Lara's murder, as the government looked for justice.
He didn't wear it.
Wouldn't have made a difference.
Jaime Ramirez. Working alongside Rodrigo Lara in stamping out cartel influence was Colonel Ramirez, director of the Colombian Drug Enforcement Unit for the National Police of Colombia. In 1984, Ramirez was involved in an operation with the DEA to find the Medellin cartel's stash in the jungle, delivering a huge blow to the group. But this made Ramirez a target. In November 1986, while traveling with his family, unknown assassins connected to the Medellin cartel drove their vehicle alongside Ramirez's car. After taking out the car that contained Ramirez's bodyguards, they opened fire. They wounded Ramirez, causing him to crash before finishing the job.
Usted le pidió a un niño que me entregara esto.
In 1992, Ramirez was posthumously awarded the title of Brigadier General, a position he was meant to have a month after his passing. Margarito Martinez.
Uno no puede decir, no, es que no me da miedo mi trabajo, no me asusta la muerte. No puedo decir eso, ¿no? Es lógico.
As a photojournalist specializing in crime in Tijuana, Mexico, Martinez was a well-known figure in the community. However, he was falsely linked to a Facebook group that openly criticized cartels and unmasked members' identities. After receiving threats, Martinez was in the process of getting governmental help when in January 2022, he was fatally shot.
He'd reported and been incorporated into a mechanism to protect journalists, but despite this mechanism, he was still murdered.
Adrián El Uber Ramos and José El Huesos Ochoa were reportedly paid around $2,500 to assassinate Martinez. In December 2022, the duo was both sentenced to 25 years in jail in order to pay $25,000 compensation to Martinez's family. As of the time of writing, the people who ordered the journalist's murder have not been charged.
17 de enero del 2022, Margarito Martínez Esquivel.
¡Presente! Chalino Sanchez.
Cuando no me veas me tientas, pa' que sepas por donde ando.
After working with his brother Armando as a coyote, an immigrant smuggler, everything changed for Sanchez in 1984 when his brother was murdered. 4 months after surviving an attack at a gig in Coachella, Sanchez was handed an alleged threat while performing in Culiacan, Mexico. As he left the venue with his family, an armed group pulled over their vehicle and took Sanchez. His body was found the next day, seemingly executed by a cartel. Another musician who was allegedly murdered by the Los Zetas group was Valentin Elizalde in 2006. Only a year later, Sergio Gomez was fatally attacked by an apparent gang. Jaime Zapata.
Zapata says while her son chose a life of service, these men chose a life of crime. Now she questions what message the U.S. government is sending to others about crimes against federal agents.
In February 2011, Zapata and Victor Avila, 2 agents with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, were traveling from Laredo, Texas to Mexico City. While driving in the Mexican state of San Luis Potosí, 2 speeding vehicles appeared, began opening fire, and rammed the agents' car off the road. Even though Zapata and Avila loudly shouted they were U.S. diplomats, the armed men continued shooting, injuring the agents and fleeing.
Their vehicle was cut off and bandits attacked. Both agents were critically injured by gunfire.
Zapata drove away from the scene before collapsing and passing away. Avila was treated for his wounds. The Los Zetas cartel was responsible for the attack, and eventually, the murderers were arrested.
Agent Zapata's story is one that we must not forget, and it is one that we will not.
The 2010 San Fernando Massacre.
This monument reminds us the impunity that we have in our country.
In 2010, as a war between former allies Los Zetas and the Gulf Cartel consumed the Mexican city of San Fernando, an injured Ecuadorian teenager called Luis approached some Mexican Marines. He told them he had just survived a terrible massacre. Luis had been part of a group of immigrants traveling towards the U.S. who were taken to a warehouse by members of Los Zetas. There, the gang executed 72 people, with only 3 lucky individuals surviving. The group apparently did this to steal money, get information, and make sure the immigrants were not working with the Gulf Cartel. Los Zetas are also believed to have slain 2 of the investigators into the massacre. Eventually, 81 members of the gang were arrested. Enrique Kiki Camarena. After working for the police, Camarena joined the recently formed U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration in 1973. Eventually, he joined the branch in Guadalajara, Mexico, where his work led to several plantations being seized.
Yeah, all we got is field workers and a couple of managers, but the consolation prize is we got all kinds of dope, man.
In February 1985, Camarena was abducted by corrupt officials. He was believed to have been responsible for the closure of the 2,500-acre site known as Rancho Búfalo the year before, leading to retaliation. Camarena's body was found a month later, showing signs of abuse. The investigation concluded that Guadalajara cartel founders Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo were responsible, getting a sentence of 40 years each. Several others were sentenced for their participation too. However, there have been allegations the CIA was also involved.
Whatever they want, whatever they're looking for, you don't know anything.
The Monterrey casino attack.
President Felipe Calderón came to the crime scene on Friday and placed a wreath in front of the charred building.
In August 2011, members of the Los Zetas cartel sought revenge for the Casino Royale in Monterrey, Mexico. The owner had not paid a protection payment, so they decided to send a message. The cartel forced their way into the casino, pouring gasoline everywhere as people ran for the emergency exits, only to find the doors locked. Then, Los Zetas set the building on fire and left within 3 minutes of arriving. All of this was captured on surveillance footage. When emergency services arrived, they found the bodies of 52 people inside and many injured. By 2022, only 5 people who were linked to the attack were arrested on unrelated weapon charges.
The attackers are said to have doused flammable liquid in the casino and then set it alight.
The 2011 San Fernando Massacre.
The Zetas have moved in. They are Mexico's most violent, most depraved, most feared crime cartel.
In March 2011, over several days, public transport buses filled with passengers in San Fernando, Mexico were taken by Los Zetas. It's speculated the group did this to force people to work with them or interrogate passengers suspected of involvement with the Gulf Cartel. The kidnapped people were assaulted and many allegedly made to fight each other in gladiator-style fights. Over several weeks, the authorities began finding numerous mass graves. In the end, 193 bodies were discovered. Soon after, 82 people involved with Los Zetas were arrested in connection with the massacre. 16 corrupt police officers were imprisoned for aiding the gang. This horrific event led to the cartel's higher-ups, such as Miguel Treviño Morales, being imprisoned.
He was captured on this country road near the Texan border. With him, his bodyguard, his accountant, $2 million in cash.
Which leader of a criminal organization is the most frightening? Pablo Escobar, Ronnie and Reggie Cray, Griselda Blanco, Al Capone, or someone else?
This next group of political assassinations will likely shock and horrify you. We'll also examine the impact it had on their respective country.
He thought he was amongst friends. 22 days later, he was dead.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're looking at 10 horrifying political assassinations.
New questions now about whether politics are behind a terrible tragedy overseas. A rising political star killed on the streets of England, the world mourning the loss of 41-year-old Joe Cox.
For this list, we're examining some of the most brutal political slayings and the impact their demise had on the country's landscape. Which assassinations did we miss in the video? Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln went down in history as the president that abolished slavery and led the Union against the Confederacy in the American Civil War.
I can't accomplish a goddamn thing of any human meaning or worth until we cure ourselves of slavery and end this pestilential war.
In April 1865, just 5 days after General Robert E. Lee's surrender, Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, went to watch the play Our American Cousin along with guests. However, actor John Wilkes Booth had other ideas.
As the crowd roars with laughter, Booth takes aim.
Supporting the South, he sought to end Lincoln and his ideas. Booth snuck up behind the president and shot him before running away.
Booth stepped up to him, fired a shot from perhaps 3-4 inches, not right against Lincoln's head, but close.
While Lincoln survived for many hours, he tragically passed away. Booth was located 2 weeks later and perished in a shootout. The Civil War officially ended just a month after Lincoln's assassination. Leon Trotsky. A key figure in the rise of communism in Russia in the early 1900s, Trotsky was a close associate of Vladimir Lenin, as the two formed the basis for the Soviet Union. However, when Lenin passed away in 1924, there was a rush for power, and Joseph Stalin claimed it. He saw his former comrade as a threat, which eventually led to Trotsky being exiled, and he then criticized Stalin's vision at any chance.
The Mexican government opened the doors of his magnificent country and say to us, here you can freely defend your rights and your honor.
Angered by this, Stalin sent agents to track down Trotsky. After enduring one assassination attempt in 1939, Trotsky survived another in Mexico City in May 1940. But by August, Trotsky's luck had run out, as Ramon Mercader struck with an ice pick, taking out one of the last opponents to Stalin's reign.
The only clue to the mystery surrounding his murder came from the dying man himself when he said, "I will not survive the attack." Stalin has finally accomplished the task he has set out to do.
Patrice Lumumba.
Patrice Lumumba fought for the freedom of his country, and he was killed for that. And the country never really recovered from that loss.
In 1960, Lumumba became the first prime minister of what was then known as the Republic of the Congo. For years, he had been fighting to free Congo from its colonial rule by Belgium. With his left-wing views, he achieved this feat by heading the Mouvement National Congolais and gaining support throughout the African country. But by September, a pro-Belgium and U.S. Union of Congolese figures led a coup d'etat.
The Belgians and the Americans sought to maintain their influence over the area. Both countries also saw Lumumba as a threat, accusing him of ties to the Soviet Union.
Lumumba was arrested and tortured. In January 1961, Lumumba was executed, and his body was destroyed. When the world heard the news, they were outraged. In 2002, Belgium formally apologized for its role in Lumumba's demise. In 2022, they gave the Democratic Republic of the Congo a gold tooth, the only surviving piece of Lumumba.
Congolese people at home and abroad hope it'll take less time for their nation and their hero to get justice.
Michael Collins. His guerrilla warfare skills during the Irish War of Independence against Great Britain were so legendary that several global revolutionary leaders studied Collins' work.
Good evening, lads. Hands in the air. Drop your weapons! Now!
He even orchestrated the violent Bloody Sunday event in 1920. Collins, who was one of the leaders in the Irish Republican Army, signed the Anglo-Irish Treaty in 1921, partitioning Ireland and creating the Free State. This caused the IRA to split into being either pro or anti-treaty, which then led to the Irish Civil War.
Do it! Fire! Fire!
Heading the pro-treaty Free State Army, Collins was ambushed by anti-treaty forces in County Cork, Ireland in August 1922. The 31-year-old perished from a gunshot wound. Ireland was devastated by the loss, as around 500,000 people reportedly attended his funeral. Nicholas II of Russia,
loved, feared, revered, respected. But all too often, those who fly highest fall furthest.
With rising tensions brewing in Russia, Nicholas II abdicated the throne at the end of the February Revolution in 1917. Not long after, the provisional government arrested the House of Romanov.
In 1917, Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown. Lenin's Bolsheviks seized control.
The royal family was then imprisoned in various locations around Russia and Siberia during this period of flux. But things changed. Nicholas, his wife Alexandra Feodorovna, and their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, as well as several servants, were executed by Bolshevik revolutionaries in July 1918.
After the execution, the Romanov family was brought here to Galinaya Yama and dumped in this old iron mine.
Nicholas, who was familiar with assassination since his grandfather, Alexander II, was a victim in 1881, was the last Tsar of Russia. For years, the location of their remains was lost to time, but in 1998, they were laid to rest in St. Petersburg. Joe Cox.
The world mourning the loss of 41-year-old Joe Cox, a mother of 2.
Siding with the Remain campaign during the Brexit debate in the UK, Cox represented the Labour Party MP for the area of Batley and Spen from 2015. In June 2016, she was on her way to a constituency surgery in West Yorkshire, England. However, Thomas Mayer slew Cox in the street.
Joe Cox was shot and stabbed, rushed to a hospital where she died shortly after.
Mayer, an extremist, had ties to numerous far-right groups and owned a lot of fascist paraphernalia.
We have nothing but pity that his life was so devoid of love and consumed with hatred that this became his desperate and cowardly attempt to find meaning.
He made no attempt to defend his deplorable actions during the trial. Mayer was sentenced to a whole life term in prison, meaning he'll never be paroled. Figures from all sides of the political spectrum banded together to celebrate the life of Cox. Her sister, Kim Ledbetter, took over as MP for Batley and Spen in 2021. Alexander Litvinenko.
This was not some random killing. This was a killing with a very clear purpose, and that it was a killing with some state involvement.
Specializing in combating organized crime, Litvinenko was an officer in the Russian Federal Security Service after working in the KGB. However, after clashing with Vladimir Putin, Litvinenko escaped to the UK and was granted asylum. He then helped its intelligence services with information about Russia, as well as writing books and articles criticizing Putin's reign. In November 2006, Litvinenko suddenly fell ill with poisoning from polonium radiation.
He was saying that he was a former member of the Russian intelligence agency and that he believed he had been poisoned by some of his former colleagues.
Within weeks, Litvinenko deteriorated rapidly, and he perished. In 2007, the Guinness World Records inducted Litvinenko as the first person to be slain by radiation.
Polonium is 100% deadly. It destroys cells, the immune system, and leads to organ failure throughout the body.
Before passing, Litvinenko accused Putin of his demise, and in the aftermath, those accusations grew louder. In 2021, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia was responsible for Litvinenko's passing. John F. Kennedy. In November 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy arrived in Texas to smooth over tensions within the Democratic Party.
The young president, just 46, the first U.S. leader to be born in the 20th century, not even 3 years in office, he would never grow older than this image.
As he traveled in an open-top limousine through Dallas on November 22nd with his wife Jackie, Texas Governor John Connally, and Connally's wife, he was fatally shot.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
Connally was wounded but recovered. The assassin was Lee Harvey Oswald, whose motives remain unknown. A few years earlier, he had identified as a communist and defected to the Soviet Union before returning to the U.S. Oswald was arrested, but just 2 days later, he too was fatally shot, this time by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. JFK's assassination shocked the nation and sparked conspiracy theories that are still debated today.
Down this avenue of sadness, they bring President John F. Kennedy, martyred hero, lie in state under the great dome of the Capitol.
Benazir Bhutto.
A controversial figure, loved by many, loathed by others for her outspoken views.
She broke ground by becoming the first woman to lead a democratic government in a majority Muslim country when Bhutto became Prime Minister of Pakistan in 1988. With 2 reigns in the role, things fell apart in 1996 when Bhutto was accused of corruption. She spent years in exile, where she vocally criticized the regime of Pakistan's president, Pervez Musharraf. In 2007, Bhutto returned to Pakistan to run in the general election. Having already survived 1 assassination attempt, Bhutto attended a rally in Rawalpindi in December.
At the time, it was one of Pakistan's largest bombing attacks, in which over 150 people died. Bhutto survived, but in December of the same year, she was not so lucky.
There, she was slain, and upwards of 20 people perished as well. While a firearm and a bomb were used, it's unclear what the fatal cause exactly was.
Bhutto's death remains controversial. Her killers have still not been brought to justice despite investigations by the Pakistani and British police and a United Nations investigation team.
This event sparked violent protests across the country. Indira Gandhi.
Very deepest condolences to the Indian people. It appears, and I stress it appears, we have the report only from AFP, the Agence France-Presse, that Mrs. Gandhi has been assassinated, that she is dead.
Gandhi had quite a legacy in India. Not only was she the first woman prime minister of the country, but she was in charge during 1971's Independence War and sided with Bangladesh. Amid her second term in office in October 1984, Gandhi was assassinated by 2 of her Sikh bodyguards.
In 1977, she lost a re-election bid, but returned to the prime minister's post in 1980 and angered the Sikh population by her handling of Sikh violence in Punjab.
Allegedly as a response to Operation Blue Star, an operation against Sikh leaders. The bodyguards were executed in 1989. In the aftermath, her son, Rajiv Gandhi, became prime minister until 1989. In May 1991, Gandhi, who was on the campaign trail in Sriperumbudur, was the victim of an explosion carried out by the militant group, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. 14 other people, along with the assassin, also lost their lives.
Okay, for our last video, we're going to be doing something a little different. They're still shocking assassinations. However, they were carried out in the movies.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the most harrowing politically or ideologically motivated assassinations in movies, fictional or not. Spoiler alert.
The person you know as Malcolm X is no more.
Number 10, Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi.
The object of this massive tribute died as he had always lived, a private man without wealth, without property, without official title or office.
Richard Attenborough's 3-hour biopic about the famed Indian independence leader begins at the end of the story. Its opening is a chilling and suspenseful sequence. We follow a man, Hindu nationalist Nathuram Godse, as he makes his way toward Gandhi's home.
You will be saying prayers in the garden, just follow the others.
Even if we know how this is going to turn out, watching the man nervously make eye contact with his conspirators as he worms his way through the crowd is anxiety-inducing. Because the audience largely knows about Gandhi's assassination, the decision to open the film with that scene catches us off guard.
Brother, Papu is already late for prayers.
His tragic end is never too far from our mind. Number 9, Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa.
Tell him I know he doesn't mean it. Tell him I'll meet him. Where? The Roadhouse, 2 tomorrow.
The thing about Jimmy Hoffa is that while we all know what happened, we don't actually know how it happened. The Teamsters leader who ran afoul of the Mafia most likely met his end at their hands. Martin Scorsese's The Irishman had its own theory.
Let's get out of here. Come on.
However, the 1992 movie about Hoffa presents an incredibly dramatic take on his murder, placing it in the parking lot of a diner.
Mr. Hoffa? Yeah, that's right.
Played by Jack Nicholson, Hoffa is gunned down in slow motion as his bodyguard, played by Danny DeVito, watches in horror. His face as he tries to rear up on his assassin is creepy in a way only Nicholson can manage. The assassins get extra horrible style points for the James Bond-esque disposal of the body. Number 8, Senator Carroll, The Parallax View.
How do you manage that? Always smiling.
Well, I'll tell you, we're very happy that breeds smiling faces, and I'm happy to be with my constituents today on such a wonderful day.
This paranoid political thriller was originally going to be based on the JFK assassination. Instead, they went with a fictional figure whose death more resembled Robert Kennedy's. The Parallax View opens with the assassination of a senator during a speech at Seattle's famous Space Needle.
Independence Day? Independence Day is very meaningful to me because sometimes I've been called too independent for my own good.
Though his assassin is dressed as a waiter, the police end up chasing the wrong one. The spectacular sequence ends in true Hitchcockian fashion, with the presumed assassin fleeing to the top of the building and falling to his death while the real gunman goes free. It's a thrilling scene that sets you up for the movie's various questions about who's really running things.
The committee wishes to emphasize that there is no evidence of any wider conspiracy. No evidence whatsoever.
Number 7, Walter Monk McGinn, Gangs of New York.
Citizens of the 5 Points, Mr. Bill Cutting is attempting to draw me into an argument that would no doubt end in bloodshed and the compromising of my office.
The streets of 19th century New York City are the battleground, in the violent power struggle between clans of Catholics and Protestants. As Bill the Butcher's enemies attempt to diminish his violent influence over the city, the new sheriff, Monk McGinn, challenges Bill, not to fight, but to settle their differences the democratic way.
The very notion of violent reprisal benumbs them. Come on up. Let's see if we can resolve our grievances the democratic way.
But his name is Bill the Butcher, not Bill the Discusser. McGinn soon eats his words and Bill's club. He's murdered right in front of dozens of witnesses. True to form, Daniel Day-Lewis rings the moment for all it's worth.
Is the minority vote. Now you've tasted my mutton. How do you like it, huh?
Number 6, Commissioner Loeb and Judge Cirillo, The Dark Knight.
Get them both into protective custody. Where's the commissioner?
City Hall.
Seal the building. No one in or out till I get there.
Got it.
District Attorney Harvey Dent openly wages war on the mob. However, the Joker is the one who comes calling. In this unforgettable sequence, his evil plot against Gotham City begins. The targets are several of the city's leading criminal justice figures, including Dent, Police Commissioner Loeb, and Judge Cirillo. He memorably saves the mayor, Anthony Garcia, for later.
Sorry, sir. We believe the Joker's made a threat against your life.
These are dangerous people, Judge.
Yeah, but you're not giving me an awful lot of information.
Even we don't know where you're going.
As the chaos unfurls between 3 separate locations, the movie crosscuts, building the tension to a fever pitch. Clues as to what's about to happen come too quick to truly put together. Even as Judge Cirillo's car goes up in flames and Commissioner Loeb is dying from his poisoned glass, you barely have time to prepare for the next hit.
We made it.
Number 5, Adolf Hitler, Inglourious Bastards.
I have a message for Germany. That you are all going to die.
This alternate history war epic by Quentin Tarantino ditches the historical record for a more satisfyingly violent end to a monster's life. 2 separate revenge plans against Hitler and his commanders converge at a cinema in 1944 Paris. Because of the whole historical angle, audiences were probably expecting the dictator to escape the trap at the end.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
Is that the way you say it? That's a bingo.
That would not be a bingo. As a fast-burning nitrate film fire ravages the cinema, the titular American commandos open fire on Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and the theater full of Nazis. It's an almost operatic level of violence. Given that it's, well, Hitler, it's a thrilling scene of retribution.
Are you mad? What have you done? I made a deal with you, General, for that man's life!
Number 4, John F. Kennedy, JFK.
You have to conclude that there was a 4th shot and a 2nd rifleman.
And if there was a second rifleman, then by definition, there had to be a conspiracy, which we believe involves the accused Clay Shaw. 51 witnesses, gentlemen of the jury, thought they heard shots coming from the grassy knoll, which is to the right in front of the president. Key witnesses that day? Charles Brem, the combat vet. Right behind, Gene Hill and Mary Moorman. S.M. Holland, Richard Dodd, James Simmons, standing on the overpass. J.C. Price, overlooking the whole plaza. William Newman, father of 2 children, who hit the deck on the north side of Elm.
The events of November 22nd, 1963 have been dissected over and over again. Images from it are part of American cultural memory. Movies like Jackie have tried to demystify it by putting us right in the center of the action. Oliver Stone's paranoid conspiracy movie makes us relive the tragedy of that day as experienced by the people who weren't there. Then it hones in on the moment Kennedy died through the use of the real-life video footage of the assassination.
They wait till he gets to the killing zone between 3 rifles. Kennedy makes a final turn from Houston onto Elm, slowing down to some 11 miles an hour. The shooters across Dealey Plaza tighten, taking their aim, waiting for the radio to say, green, green, or abort, abort.
Kevin Costner's district attorney forces us to really look at the footage, and look again, and keep looking until we understand his point. The movie won an Oscar for its editing. It's not hard to see why.
So what really happened that day? Let's just for a moment speculate, shall we?
Number 3, Harvey Milk. Milk.
If Dan shows up, just avoid him. We don't need a scene today, do we, Harvey?
God forbid, Diane.
Mr. White, Mayor will see you now.
Dan, come on in. I want to...
In 1977, the gay rights activist and first openly gay man elected to public office in America, Harvey Milk, was gunned down in his office by a political rival, Dan White. Milk's assassination, along with that of Mayor George Moscone, are dramatized to shattering effect in Gus Van Sant's 2008 biopic, Milk.
Now look, take some time off, spend it with your family.
Van Sant's camera doesn't shy away from showing us the reality of that moment. For as romantic and idealistic as Harvey Milk is shown to be, his death plays out with shocking clarity.
No.
Only in his last moments as he looks out at the opera house that he loved so much are gentle, and then White delivers his last bullet. Number 2, Malcolm X. Malcolm X.
Malcolm. What's wrong? It's a time for martyrs now. Where I feel I shouldn't go out there today.
Like many of the entries on this list, Spike Lee's biopic has to make the gravity of a historical event feel like it's happening again. But even knowing how Malcolm X's life ended can't prepare you for the horrifying sight of the charismatic leader being gunned down in front of his wife and children.
Assalamu alaikum.
Get your hand out of my pocket!
The scene descends into chaos. One gunman is even chased down by a mob. Meanwhile, we're left with his wife, Betty Shabazz, played by Angela Bassett, as she cradles Malcolm's head. It's an overwhelming climax, making the historical reality into something that feels urgent and tragic.
The assassination of Malcolm X was an unfortunate tragedy, and it reveals that there are still numerous people in our nation who have degenerated to the point of expressing dissent through murder. And we haven't learned to disagree without being violently disagreeable.
Number 1, Senator and Eleanor Iceland, the Manchurian candidate.
It's up under the roof on the 8th Avenue side of the garden. You will have absolutely clear, protected shooting. You are to shoot the presidential nominee through the head. And Johnny will rise gallantly to his feet and lift Ben Arthur's body in his arms, stand in front of the microphones and begin to speak.
Long before she was the plucky amateur detective in Murder, She Wrote, Angela Lansbury was a movie star who plays the diabolical Eleanor Iceland in this 1962 thriller about brainwashed POWs. She's a senator's wife who's hired an assassin to take out her husband's political enemy.
You are to hit him right at the point that he finishes the phrase, Nor would I ask of any fellow American, in defense of his freedom, that which I would not gladly give myself. My life before my liberty. Is that absolutely clear?
Little did she know they'd send her own son for the job. This doesn't deter her one bit. However, in the movie's climax at Madison Square Garden, her son turns his gun on her and her husband instead. It's one of the greatest and most shocking endings of all time.
You couldn't have stopped them. The army couldn't have stopped them. So I had to. That's why I didn't go. Oh, God, Ben.
What movie assassination stayed with you after you saw it?
Made to commit acts too unspeakable to be cited here. By an enemy who had captured his mind and his soul. He freed himself at last. And in the end, heroically and unhesitatingly gave his life to save his country. Raymond Shaw.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this deep dive into notorious assassinations. Thanks for watching. I've been Matt from Watch Mojo, and I'll see you next time.